Painting from light to dark is the normal process in watercolor, in that you first paint with light values and colors, and then you add darker ones as you go on. I say normal, rules can be broken in watercolor. It is possible, and I do it myself sometimes, by painting a darker area and then go in with a lighter value around it. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot, and in this video I'm going to paint a harbour scene in Livorno, Italy, and demonstrate painting from light to dark. So this is the scene, a background of some buildings. I think they belong to the Port Authority here. And some various crafts and various boats at different angles along the harbour side there, and some nice reflections. So I say paint from light to dark. I will be leaving some areas unpainted. So for example, look at the light area on some of these boats. The light's coming from the left. The light's going from left to right, so we have some light areas here, and this is where I will not paint these areas. I'll leave them unpainted, exposing the white paper for the very bright areas of the picture. So there's these two sides of the boats there, a little bit on the top of this boat with the side facing us. So before painting, I'm just observing the scene. I'm just imagining painting this scene in watercolor, and in my own mind trying to come up with a plan or a sequence of stages I'm going to go through. So thinking what will be the light areas? What's the lightest area of my picture? And what will be the darkest areas of the picture? Will there be any focal point, if any? I mean, I don't have to go with a focal point. There could be more than one focal point. And thinking about timings as well that I need to be aware of. As I say, going through those sequence of steps. But the main thing is just looking and looking at the subject before I'm going to paint. Okay, so let's make a start. The paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford, very good quality watercolor paper, and I'm using a soft pencil just to get in the outline of the main shapes in the picture. By the way, if you like these videos, please consider supporting me via Patreon at www.patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, TIMWILMOT. Every month or two, I set a painting project for my members, and for a small pledge, I'll give you a personal critique when you send me a photograph of your painting. I give you a personal critique with some extra hints and tips. So for more information, please go to my Patreon site, and you'll find the links in the description of this video. So, getting in the main shapes now for a main boat in the picture, right in the center there, the one that's catching most of the light. As I say, I'm just getting in the main lines that will help me when I'm painting to paint within those boundaries, and just also trying to think about what are the light areas in this picture and what are going to be the dark areas in this picture. Now this second boat, it's showing less of that side, so just a slim line of light going around it. Then there is this small hut or shed on the harbour side, And then over on the left hand side, we've got this craft with the side facing us. I think it's quite interesting just having all these different angles there, not all of them facing towards us or going away, just the side of that craft. And I'm trying to get the water line sort of level between all of the craft. So some smaller ones on the right hand side, getting that water line horizontal and all in line. There is an element of perspective here, trying to imagine your height and the eye line, just making sure that's right. The perspective is very easy with these buildings though, because we're looking at them, we're not sort of looking down a street. So just very simple horizontal lines. And when I put in those the buildings, I might just give an indication of where some of the windows will be, not all of them. Now here I'm just drawing in the rough outline of the reflections. And a little boy there floating in the water, maybe another one to balance that on the other side. People ask me sometimes, do you mind that the pencil marks show in the end painting? It doesn't really matter to me. I think it lends itself to the looseness and freshness of the watercolor style. Sometimes though, if it's a large white area that I haven't painted and there's quite a lot of pencil marks in there, I might use a rubber or an eraser to remove those. So first step over, we've done the initial drawing. I'm happy with the drawing. You've got to be happy that the drawing has to look right. Getting in all those main shapes, the composition, thinking about the composition, getting that right before then going on to do the second stage, which is the first wash. So I've just laid down, on that first wash, I've just laid down a little bit of yellow ochre, a bit of weak yellow ochre on the horizon, and then above that added in my sky. And you can see that this is the consistency of the paint is very wet. It's there's a lot of water here, and I'm allowing these colors to bleed in with each other. Now on the right hand side, this quite red building on the right hand side, with watercolor you've got to overcompensate for the strength of the colors, because the colors will dry lighter. They're going to dry lighter than you think. So just think about that. Go in stronger, go in a little bit stronger than you think, and otherwise you might end up with a sort of weak looking wishy-washy result. So going in stronger. Now the brush I'm using is a mop brush, so it holds a lot of water, holds a lot of paint, and it's got a good edge to it as well. This brush is a Raphael brush. It's got a good edge and a good point to it, which I need that good edge when I'm going around. I need to be a bit more precise, as I'm doing here, going around the main boat in the center of the picture that's showing most of the light. Need to be a little bit precise there. Now the front of the cabin that's facing us, I've just added in a little bit of blue there, a sort of bluey grey colour, and that will be pretty much it for that that top of that cabin. I'll put in some windows, of course, some little dark windows, but that really is it. And a lot of the areas of the picture I'm painting here won't be touched again. The sky, the red building on the right hand side, the left hand side of that building that's catching the light, I won't do that again. The boat here again, this main boat, it's I think the boat is sort of, not strictly speaking white, but it's like a light grey. So I need to think about those colours on the hull of that boat. And what I did then was just go back up into those buildings, and just to add a bit more interest, so they're not too bland and too uninteresting. I'm just adding in a bit of colour because the wash there is still quite moist. I can go back in there, dab in some paint, and you get some interesting effects occurring in watercolor. So using this edge on the brush to go around that second boat, the colors I'm using, my palette here on the right hand side, is pretty much the same as other videos I've done. Starting from the top, neutral tint, and then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green. Sort of in the middle now, there's cerulean blue, then coming down, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a Windsor red. I used to use cadmium red, but I swapped that for a Windsor red, which is quite a bright red. And then below that I have a light red, and then cadmium orange. Right at the bottom is, I think that's a lemon yellow. Now I've done that boat on the left that's with the side facing us, and now for the wash of the water, which I'm just laying in the base, this base wash colour. Will be, as we're painting from light to dark, there'll be darker reflections on this, but I need to get in what will be the underlying colour of the water, and that little gap between the buildings at the top, that will be reflected, of course, down below. So I need to think about a sort of similar value to the sky above as I'm going down here. And I am, as you can see, I'm mixing in different colors. So for example, the building on the right hand side, I added a little bit of red into the water just to show that's the reflection of that building color. And also some of the reflections of the light boats on the right hand side, then that too is the underlying color on the right hand side there. There's a white area that will be the reflection of that boat, and I will paint around that going in darker, paint around that to show the reflections of the building behind it. Just adding a bit of darker value here for the reflection of the building above. Going back to what I said earlier, you might think, oh, that was quite a bright red, but you just need to overcompensate. It's gonna dry a lot lighter. Now I let everything dry, and I've just edited the video just to skip past that drying process, which I normally would let dry naturally, but sometimes I'll speed up the process with a hairdryer. And third stage now is adding in some darker values. We're painting from light to dark, so we now need to go in with some darker values. And I'm using a smaller brush here, so with the first wash stage I'll try and use as big a brush as I've got, and then this next stage where I'm adding in the darks, I'll go in with a smaller brush. So this is again a mop brush, but a smaller size than the big Raphael that I had before. And starting from left to right, being right-handed, generally speaking, I'll go from left to right, just so that I'm avoiding smudging my work with my hand. So going in with this building here on the left-hand side, darker values, but I will leave out some of the architectural details. There was a strong, I've got a strong vertical line and there's a horizontal line sort of halfway down the building. And again, it's not all one color. As I'm going down this building, I'm adding in different colors. It's mainly yellow ochre, but I'll add in a little bit of neutral tint there at the top, just to try and get in some darker values, which I noticed on the right. Again, it's going to dry a lot lighter than this. So carefully, as best I can, draw in a steady horizontal line where this light band is going across the building. There are some ground level windows which I'll just paint around as carefully as I can, and yeah, so paint around these windows, and as I come down to ground level I'll go a little bit darker. I was saying before, when I paint, I try and think about, in the planning stage, I try and think about the darkest area of the picture and the lightest area of the picture. Well, that could be it, sort of in the middle here. Between the two big buildings, it's quite dark in the area that's sort of joining these two buildings. So, and that will form a nice bit of contrast around the light edge of that, the main boat in the middle of my picture. And then of course it'll be quite dark around the whole line of that main boat. So a deep shadow underneath the roof of the right-hand building, and then the front of the building that's facing us is going to be a deeper color, going in darker now. It doesn't matter if I leave out little bits here and there. We can make these into parts of the windows or architectural details. So I'm not covering the whole building. I'm just leaving little bits, almost in a random way, just leaving little bits unpainted. Now I need to be a bit more precise with this line again, going over to the right, down to street level, going a little bit darker. There's some sort of again an architectural detail on the side of this building, which I'm just painting in there. I don't know what it is, but it looks quite interesting. Dark now, dark to the street level. Over on the side of the harbour there is a little car as well, which I'll just paint around there. All sorts of different things going on the right hand side. With a scene like this, it's not overly complex, but we do need to think about simplifying the scene and just suggesting different things, different objects, and removing objects or simplifying them. Otherwise, it'll just make it too difficult trying to replicate that scene exactly. I am using a reference photo, but I'm not trying to copy that photo exactly, and I can change things as I want to help with the composition, and try ultimately to create something that gives the impression of the scene and is not an exact copy of that photograph. If I wanted an exact copy of the photograph, I would just photograph a copy of the photograph, if you see what I mean. What's the point? Now, talking about complexity, over on the left hand side above that left hand boat is all a bit complex as regards the paraphernalia on top of that boat and the shed behind that boat on the harbour side, it's quite a darker colour. And paint around the sort of cabin of that side boat, that left-hand boat. And now going in quite dark against the sides of those boats there. Do you see it's adding a nice bit of contrast? Hopefully that will show up towards the end when I've finished the painting at the end. There's a nice bit of light there with the darker value behind it. Doesn't matter if the side of the boat there bleeds a little bit up at the bow end to that darker valley. It doesn't matter too much because that's on the opposite side to where the sun is coming from, so I can let those just merge in gently together. I've decided to use a slightly bigger mop brush here. This is still a Raphael, and a bigger mop brush because, well, you're just trying to think about the size of the area that you're painting and just using an appropriately sized brush. There's no it's going to be hard work painting over a large area with a small brush, a small fiddly brush. So just trying to get that brush size right. And this being another mop brush, it's got a good edge to it, so I can be quite precise with the detail along the waterline there. And as I'm with these reflections, as I'm coming down with a sort of zigzag motion of the brush, I'm trying to create the impression of a few waves and these reflections. So this color is cobalt green mainly, a little bit of neutral tint for the darker areas, and you can see that the reflections, the paint of the reflections is now bleeding into the that left-hand boat there, because I just painted that side of that boat. It was still moist, and it's traveling, it's going up against gravity. Here we go, just a few random lines. And we'll be showing a little bit more of the paper as we come down. But a little bit darker up towards where the holes of the boats are, but just expose a little bit more as we come to the foreground. So you've got to, also with this wash, you've got to perhaps make up enough paint just to make sure you're going to cover that whole area rather than running out and then having to hurriedly make some more paint, and by the time you've done that, the first lot has dried, so you end up with some strange edges. So you're just thinking it through and making sure you've got the right amount of colour there mixed up. Now just dabbed a little bit more up into the main area of the reflections, just to create some lighter areas there when I dabbed in the brush again into that area. So over now to the reflections below the main boat, and I do need to leave a little bit of a slither of light, which is the reflection of the red building, that side that's catching the light. And I need to paint around the reflections of the smaller white boats here on the right hand side. So just make sure I've got enough paint on my brush, not too much, not too little, and then holding it like a pen, almost at a 45-degree angle, just going over these reflections. And it has to be done fairly quickly. We don't want to overwork this area. You do need to know when to stop and not overdo things, and so maybe as you're going through this stage, just step back and make an appraisal of it, and think, do I need to add anything more into it? Now back with a smaller mop brush. We can add in a bit more details on the hull here. Now, I think I do need to go a bit darker on this, on these boats here. They're a bit too light. So that first wash wasn't dark enough. It doesn't matter, because we are going from light to dark, so I can, with watercolor, I can go darker on top of the lighter paint. So while I've got this small brush, I can add in a few more details to the that smaller boat on the right hand side and the car on the harbour side. Just doing a bit of splattering there of some yellow ochre into the reflection. The reflections are still quite damp, and I can go in there and just splatter in something, to splatter in a bit of water just to make them a bit more interesting. Yeah, so these boats do need to be a little bit darker. So I'm using neutral tint there, just check the edge on my brush. I'm just mixing the paint just to check that I've got the right value. Could just leave it a little bit of an edge there on the right hand side of that boat, just to maybe where the light is catching the right hand side, just to show a little bit of a line there. These two boats, they're almost joined together, and that's one thing you've got to think about with boats in a row, is that just don't think of them as individual boats, just think about the overall shape. It's the same principle when I'm drawing, when I'm painting a row of cars. I just think, in say a car park, I just think of the overall shape of the cars together rather than individual cars. These reflections are still quite damp. I can still add paint into it. Just speed up the drying process now with my hairdryer. I need to make sure everything is 100% dry before going on to the next stage, which will be more of the details. Again, we're going darker. And with these different stages, I'm generally going thicker on each stage, so there's less water to paint ratio. With the initial wash, it was quite watery, quite weak, whereas now with this, I'm using a smaller brush with these stages. I'm going down in size in brush, but it's thicker paint. So I've got a small synthetic brush here, adding in some details of the building on the left hand side, just a few, not too many. I want to give the impression of an older building, the style of the architecture, and just imply some architectural details like the framing around the windows and the windows themselves. That, as I said, that area between the two buildings is quite dark, so I need to go darker still with this little detail work, and a dark area on the right hand side underneath the roof of the red building, an indication of some windows. Not all of them, just a few. This is in the background, so I don't need to be too precise over the areas here. The side of that car on the harbour, and the top of the harbour, if I get something wrong, just quickly smudge it out with my fingertips. This is the bottom of the harbour wall, which, being darker, just a bit of careful painting around the boats gives me a bit more definition to those boats. And these boats need a water line as well. Details on the main boats now. Not too many on that white area that is catching the light. I don't want to overly clutter that up. Paint on these 3 windows. As you can see, they're just very loosely painted. Not strictly speaking a neat square or rectangle. It's just a few brush strokes just to indicate those windows. And apart from a strong water line, boats need a nice line across the top of the hull. That often just makes the boats look a little bit more realistic, hopefully. And that second main boat there doesn't have, well, it's not going to have too many windows as such on it. Left-hand building, just a few windows there. Again, like the right-hand side, just an indication of those windows. I'm not doing all of the windows the same as well. Some are painted in, some are left unpainted, some will just have the outline of a window. As in these ground floor windows. I just painted that main one there on the left hand side, but just leave a few of them unpainted. I've got to be a bit careful with on the boundaries of the picture having too great a range in values. I need to maintain those strong values in the sort of center of the painting. Now that left hand arched window, that will dry a little bit lighter, hopefully. Strong waterline of the left-hand boat. Not a continuous line. I'm doing almost a lost and found here, where it's strong. It's a strong line in some areas and then a weaker line in others. And there's not a continuous line across there. this shed, I'll just put some details on that. Down to the top of the boat, that just defines the top of the boat a little bit more. And then a few reflections of those darker lines I put in. So this is, if you like, the third stage of doing the water. The first step was getting in that first wash. Second step was the reflections, the main area of the reflections, and then the third stage is adding in some darker lines here and there, just to some wavy lines coming vertically down, just to pick up on some of the darker values above, like windows or darker areas above the waterline. As I'm doing now. Few little darker areas up by the waterline, and then gradually come down to the foreground, just with that sideways motion there. You've got to keep looking at your reference photo just to assist you with these reflections, just to pick up on some of these smaller details in the reflections, just where those lines are. And then hopefully it'll start to look just a little bit more realistic as a watery scene. A few verticals. I think a good painting always needs a strong vertical or a strong horizontal somewhere. When you look at other paintings, for me, a strong edge, a strong line often makes the painting. So that's another thing to think about. Now, I mustn't overdo the reflections too much, so I just need to have a certain economy here and put on the brakes when I think I might be overdoing it, as indeed with the whole painting. And I am nearing the latter stages of the painting, and painting from light to dark, but then breaking the rules now with a little bit of white paint, almost straight out the tube, so very thick, small brush. I'm just picking up on some of the details like masts and rigging and sonar equipment and aerials on top of those boats, just a few. Not overdo it too much. A few little dabs here and there. Again, you can overdo things a little bit, where I think I've not got a stronger value. I've missed something out, so I missed out the line across the top of that boat, so I've just got to put that in now. Waterline as well. Smudge things out if I want to have a little bit of a softer edge. I'm just going around the painting now, not trying to overdo it, but just add in a few brush marks here and there, just where I see fit, just to really finalize things. I do need a few, just indication of a window there on that building. It looked a bit, it's a bit blank. And that's it, done. So here is the finished painting, a harbour scene in Livorno, and trying to demonstrate painting in watercolour, going from light to dark. So thinking about the light areas first, leave those unpainted, like the sides of these boats here, the top of that left-hand boat as well. Then the lighter values, the sky, the reflection of the sky, the rooftops, the side of the buildings facing the strong sun, and then with later stages going in darker, so the darker background buildings, the buildings that are facing us, the darker values on the boats, the darker reflections, and then later stages going in darker still with the little details of the windows, the details around the boats, the waterline, don't forget the waterline, some of the reflections as well, and if need be, use a little bit of white paint to assist you with things like aerials or masts, things like that. So hopefully you like this painting. If you want to have a go at some of the painting projects I set, please take a look at my Patreon site, www.patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. Take a look at my website, timwilmot.com, for more images. But thanks for watching this video, and catch up with you next time. Bye-bye.